For 3 years, I sat in the back of glass-walled boardrooms and watched my manager present my ideas as his own. I watched the executives nodding along, clapping, and telling him what a visionary he was. And every single time, I smiled. I kept my mouth shut, gathered my notes, and went back to my desk. I didn't say anything because I knew I had an advantage he completely overlooked. I had patience, and I was quietly building a mountain of proof. Neutralizing a toxic manager requires engineering an inescapable trap and waiting for them to walk right into it. I'm a data analyst, and I've been doing this for almost a decade. My entire job is looking at massive sets of numbers, finding the hidden patterns, and turning them into systems the business can actually run on. 3 years ago, I started working for a man I'll call Richard.
Richard couldn't build a statistical model if his career depended on it, but he dressed incredibly well and had a master-level understanding of corporate optics and executive charm. I would spend 3 weeks building a dense 40-slide analytical deck. Richard would take that deck, walk into a meeting room, and present it like the insights just came to him in the shower. The first time it happened, I brushed it off as a simple misunderstanding. By the third time, I recognized a calculated, systemic abuse of the corporate hierarchy. In modern corporate environments, raw intelligence is frequently hijacked by those who only understand perception, forcing the true experts to adapt their tactics. Every project started exactly the same way. Richard would give me a vague directive, like, leadership needs better fleet visibility, and I would spend weeks building the entire methodology, pulling the data, and writing the executive summary from scratch. We'd have a brief review session where he'd ask a couple of basic questions, make a minor visual tweak, and then carry the uncredited work directly to the leadership team. So I started keeping records. I saved every email draft. I screenshotted Slack messages where he demanded quick revisions before his board meetings. I logged the calendar invites, proving he attended my review sessions before presenting. But the most crucial evidence was the digital file metadata. My name and the creation dates were permanently stamped on the exact files Richard was presenting to the board. Over 3 years, I archived 47 individual, heavily documented instances of him taking my work. When you treat workplace toxicity as a cold, analytical data problem, you can build a dataset so overwhelming that it entirely removes the possibility of subjective debate. The breaking point arrived in February of my 3rd year. We were tasked with delivering a massive cost reduction presentation to the CEO and the executive board. This was the highest stakes presentation our department had ever handled. Real corporate money was on the table, and critical strategic decisions were going to be made based on our numbers. Following his standard playbook, Richard told me to prepare all the materials so he could deliver them. I built the deck, but I made one tiny procedural change. I submitted a formal request through our internal software to be listed as a presenting contributor, phrasing it to provide technical backup. Richard didn't even read the fine print. He clicked approve, assuming I would just sit quietly in the back row, like a human prop. A massive ego creates a massive blind spot. Someone who constantly steals credit will willingly authorize the instrument of their own destruction, as long as it looks harmless. The meeting took place on the executive floor. Richard opened the session and coasted smoothly through the first 15 slides, completely commanding the room. This chart shows the exact scatter plot regression model we were presenting. Right in the middle of the pitch, the CFO stopped him and pointed at this specific gap, asking a highly complex mathematical question about how we controlled for seasonal variance. Richard froze. You could see the panic hit his eyes as he tried to stall, throwing out vague methodology buzzwords to describe math he had never actually built. That is when I spoke up. I told the executives that I authored the model and asked if they would like me to walk them through the assumptions. For the next 20 minutes, I took complete control of the room. I answered every technical limitation and scenario directly for the CEO, while Richard sat silently at the side of the table, entirely marginalized. Under direct executive scrutiny, corporate optics fail. True domain expertise remains the only currency that survives the room. The sheer disparity in knowledge was too glaring to ignore. Almost immediately after the meeting, leadership initiated an inquiry into who I was and why my skills had been hidden for so long. That inquiry triggered a full internal audit. I handed over 3 years of hoarded metadata, project logs, and email histories. proving definitively that I was the author of nearly every major deliverable our department had produced. Richard was placed on a performance improvement plan and resigned within 6 weeks. I was given a double promotion and now present directly to the executive committee every quarter. I didn't win by walking into HR and complaining. I won by allowing a toxic manager to trap himself in front of the very people whose opinions mattered most. Waiting 3 years to spring that trap took a massive psychological toll. I was constantly tempted to forward the proof to leadership early on, just to get it over with. But an early complaint from a junior analyst against a charismatic manager is too easily dismissed. It looks like sour grapes, and management will always find a way to explain it away. A successful corporate strike requires perfect timing. You have to wait for an undeniable moment, where the knowledge gap is completely exposed and impossible to hide. If you've ever had a coworker or a boss steal credit for your hard work, tell me how you handled it in the comments below. And if you want more stories where justice is finally served, make sure to subscribe.